Hello and welcome to the Voices in Montessori podcast, brought to you by the Greenspring Center for Lifelong Learning. As Dr. Montessori tells us, an education capable of saving humanity is no small undertaking. We agree. So let's get to work. I'm Tamara Sheasley-Ballas, and in today's episode, we're talking about ways Montessori educators can bring gardening into the classroom and how to help children develop connections to the natural world. I am delighted to have Kathryn Ross with me today. Kathryn has been a Montessori educator for over 50 years. She received AMI training at the Assistance to Infancy level and the 3 to 6 level, and also holds an AMS diploma at the primary level. She and her late husband founded the Montessori Montessori School in Carbondale, Colorado in 1982, where she taught for 25 years. She also taught in Pennsylvania and has served as the head of school at Children's Garden Montessori School in Denver, Colorado. She served as an instructor at the Montessori Education Center of the Rockies for over 20 years and was also a part of the AMS faculty at Oklahoma City University, working with their sister program in Taiwan. Kathryn has an MED from Regis University with a focus on educational technology, as well as an MED in Montessori Integrative Learning from the Institute for Educational Studies, TIES, and her thesis for TIES won the AMS Best Montessori-Focused Master's Thesis in 2009. Since retiring from daily Montessori classroom work, Kathryn has focused her energy on serving the TIES faculty and learning what she can about gardening. She's both a master composter and a master gardener. She's currently developing a native plant and vegetable garden in her new home in Stillwater, Oklahoma. Thank you so much for joining me today, Kathryn.
You're welcome. I'm very excited to be here.
Well, we are so excited to have you. I have to tell you that I'll full disclosure, everyone, I am also now in the TIES program, earning my MED, and it's my 4th master's program that I've attempted. And this is the one that actually really has resonated for me. And I'm learning so much about eco-literacy and how important it is for our children and our world. And I've become absolutely enthralled with figuring out how do we fully integrate nature into our Montessori classrooms and still really have authentic Montessori practice. And that's the work that I'm digging into right now. And so, Kathryn, I'm so excited to have you here because this is your expertise and this is the work, right? This is the work that we all need to be doing to connect children to the environment so they become stewards of our earth and really care deeply about what happens to our planet. So thank you for being here.
Welcome. I'm excited.
And this is Kathryn's first podcast.
It is. It's my very first podcast. And I came inside directly from my garden to do it.
Love that.
I discovered some green, very fat caterpillars eating some of my flowers. And I don't know what they're going to turn into, but I'm excited to see them. And it fits very much with this podcast and why I think it's important to have an outdoor environment for young children. Because a child would find that caterpillar before I would. They're so observant. But you're right, Tamara, it's just critically important, I think, in this time that we're living in to connect young children to the natural world because we're facing an environmental crisis. And I don't tend to tell young children that. I might share that with my friends, other adults, read about it, think a lot about it, worry about our planet and whether we're able to sustain life here. But what I really, really want to do is connect children to the natural world so that as they grow into the reality that we're facing, they care. And you care about what you love. And you love what you see every day and spend time with. So I can get pretty passionate about it.
Mm,
Yeah, it's a big work. Um, in the TIES program, we read a book by Thomas Berry, who was both a farmer and really a philosopher. And an environmentalist, he calls connecting with the natural world and saving the natural world the great work of our time. And I think in Montessori's terms, you would call that our cosmic task.
mm,
It,
mm,
it is what we need to do right now
mhm,
because we are facing a crisis.
mhm, mhm. And you think even for toddlers and children's house students that, because Dr. Montessori, of course, talked about cosmic education in relationship
Right.
to the elementary age students, but you think this work is also critical for those younger children as well?
I do. And I think I guess you could call it indirect preparation for cosmic education.
Mm,
Um, you're right. The cosmic curriculum that Montessori developed is really for older children. But um, if we think of our cosmos and the planet that we live on as fully connected, and we as a part of it, if we can in, embed children, involve children in the natural world, even as a toddler, as an infant, um, they're prepared for the next step in cosmic education in a Montessori environment.
mm,
Uh, I think if you talk to almost any mother and ask them if one of the ways that they could um, calm a baby would be to take them outside and go for a walk,
mm,
most mothers would say, yeah, that works pretty well. There's something about young children. It's almost like a sensitive period.
mm,
They very easily connect to the outside world, to being outside, and we need to take advantage of that.
mhm. Well,
Yeah.
there's quite a bit of research coming out now. I'm reading a book called Barefoot and Balanced, and
Hmm.
there's so much research coming out now, current, that shows that children being disconnected from nature is actually impacting nervous systems. It's
Sure.
impacting their balance. It's impacting their sensory experiences. And science is able to prove that as we've removed children more and more from nature, the body does not function in the same way. We're looking at rates of anxiety and depression that are skyrocketing. Now, I think a piece of that is also the dependence on screens, but the
Right.
dependence on screens then feeds into less time in nature as well and really connecting. And
Mhm.
so the way that I see it is our bodies and the child's body, we're designed as these perfect entities as long as we do the things that our bodies need. And part of what we need is that connection with nature and that time in wild spaces to explore unencumbered by anyone else's clock or agenda or focus, and really to get to touch base with our spirit in that way.
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting what you mentioned about unencumbered by a clock. There's there's some place, and I can't tell you where, but Maria Montessori describes, I think, a Japanese father walking with his toddler and how much appreciated the way he was walking because they weren't they weren't covering much territory. The father was allowing the child, I think it was a little boy, to look at the insects crawling across the sidewalk and listen to the birds and whatever the child was interested in, the father was willing to
Mm,
stop and wait for that child. And I think that that's one of the things that Montessorians these days need to be really aware of, that we have such a such an agenda. We we need to make sure we get through the reading, the math, the science curriculum. We've got, we know where we're trying to go, and those things all take time. We need to allow ourselves to give children plenty of time outside and really slow ourselves down, because it's really important. It's really,
Mhm.
really important.
Well, I completely appreciate that. And can you talk about, let's dig into gardening, pun intended.
Okay. Yes.
And what does it look like to have a prepared environment for children that allows them to garden independently and to continue to build all of those skills that we're looking to develop in a Montessori classroom, but through the natural gardening experience?
Okay. Um, yeah, I think we're not only hoping to develop skills, we're also hoping to encourage values, certain values in a child, sort of ways of going about the world. And uh, one of them is having some patience.
Mm,
Uh, One of them is curiosity, which doesn't take much with a young child, but um, it's an important value.
mm,
Another one is just the ability to observe, to
mm,
see. Um, I'm not working with children except a little bit volunteering at a local public school, but I spend a lot of time with my 6-year-old granddaughter, and she will often come running into the house from my backyard to tell me about a strawberry that she's found that's ripened, or something else that I didn't notice at all, but that she did because she's 6 years old and she's an observer. So
mm,
we're trying to really develop that. I think we're trying to develop the skill of, or the value of sort of hanging in there, you know, consistency. Like
mm,
gardening is a slow process, and you plant the seed, and then you have to wait at least a week for a lot of seeds to even pop out of the ground, and then you have to wait weeks or months even before you can harvest. And often children have really no sense of how long it's going to take for something to, even adults don't have
mhm,
any sense of how long it takes to grow something and harvest something. So it's another value or skill
mm,
that we develop. And then I think that we give children an opportunity to develop a sense of consequences when we're working with gardening. If you don't water a plant, it will die. Uh,
mhm, mhm,
if I squashed that big green caterpillar that I found this morning, it would never turn into a butterfly. I would not be able to see what was going to happen. Um, you sometimes go out to your garden in the morning after a terrible storm, and hail has smashed your plants to the ground, and that's a consequence. There are just all kinds of sort of natural things that happen in a garden that often don't happen inside a prepared environment classroom, because you're protecting all those things. So
mhm,
there are all kinds of things that happen outside that are really valuable for children to experience, I think. Uh,
mhm,
I would say even painful. I can remember working when I was doing my internship, and I was a brand new teacher. I was working with a woman who um, did a fairly, what I thought was a fairly elaborate little funeral for one of our hamsters that had died. And she really allowed the children to be involved and decide where we were going to bury it and talk about it and draw pictures and a little booklet about how much they loved this gerbil or whatever it was. And then we buried it and made a little mark for it. And at the time, as a young, brand new teacher, I questioned some of those things, but looking back on it, I think it was a life experience that uh, we often don't allow children to have. and she did it in a very sensitive way. So those kinds of things happen all the time if you're working with living things. That's what it is, the living things. Kinds of things happen that you can't control. So those are some of the reasons that I'm really interested in gardening. And I've thought all week about this podcast, and I've asked myself that question: what's the difference between a prepared environment inside and a prepared environment outside, or how do they connect? And I began to use a different term for my outside environment. I think what it is, it's a prepared habitat. It has a lot of the characteristics of a prepared environment. It's organized, or my ideal garden for young children would be organized. There would be a space for flowers. There would be places for vegetables. It would be wonderful if there could be beds that could be raised just high enough that young children don't step in them, because they don't know about all those things, but they can reach everything well, and it's good for the plants, and it would be helpful for them. I've seen gardens for young children that really answer some of the needs that we have in our own living rooms or our own homes. There's a peaceful spot, a quiet place where you can sit under a tree and you're in the shade and you're comfortable, and you're on a nice bench, and people might leave you alone a little bit if you feel like you need to be by yourself. And there's another spot where maybe there's some water. My school in Denver had this beautiful little stream running through the back playground, and it was actually a fountain. It was recycled water, and it was filtered water, so it was clean. And whoever had designed it, and it was before I got there, put stones the children could step on, and the water was about at the most a fourth of an inch, a half an inch maybe deep. So you couldn't really hurt yourself with this water. You could get a little bit wet, but not terribly wet. And it was just the most wonderful thing I've ever seen. And happily, the health department thought it was nice too. They because that's always an issue.
Sure.
Which is, and going back to my prepared habitat, in my experience, and I've been in Colorado and Pennsylvania, we used to be able to have a turtle and an amphibian, a mammal, a bird, all of those different kinds of animals in our classrooms. And then maybe you couldn't have a bird anymore, and you couldn't have this, or you couldn't have that. Well, you can have them outside. You can have a bird feeder outside, and probably in many ways it's nicer than having a bird in a cage. And this morning I was looking in my backyard, and a little bunny hopped by, and uninvited. But yeah, those things happen. It is a habitat that animals find attractive. So you never know exactly what's going to be out there, and it's sort of exciting to see.
And so if you were giving words of advice to somebody who let's say they're a new Montessori guide, or they are new to even the conversation about opening up their door and getting children really outside beyond, recess time.
Right.
They wanted to start a little garden.
Okay.
What do you tell them of how to get started? Like, what are those words of wisdom so that they can have a positive experience? What do they do in the fall? You're not planting as much as in the fall. What can they do in the fall? How could they get children engaged in it then? What does it look like throughout the year?
Okay. So yeah, that's a really big question.
That's a big question.
Well, it's a big question, partly because I know that classrooms are so different. Everybody's environment is different and everyone's situation is different. But um, and some people have an environment which is arranged or set up well enough that you could, for example, allow one child to go outside and pick 3 flowers to put in a vase. And that would be a lovely practical life activity that would enable children to go outside, not, one at a time or maybe 2 at a time, not on the playground, not during recess time. But some people can't do that. I don't know. But if I had the ability to design a school, I would design a little tiny sort of pocket garden that was fully fenced, that was right next to one of my classroom doors to the outside, and I would be able to let a child go out by themselves and pick a flower or water the plants. That's another one. So obvious. Plants need water, and children love water, and there you go. So if you can let children go outside 1 or 2 at a time, watering, weeding's hard because children don't know what a weed is and what a flower is and a vegetable, what that is. They just don't know. But yeah, those are the 2 things that come to me immediately, is watering and picking flowers, or picking produce if it's time, if it's in the fall. I
Can I
worked
just add one piece to that?
Okay.
We did zinnias,
Oh yeah.
and they grow just, you put some seeds in the ground, and in the fall they just, at least in Maryland,
Crazy.
right?
Yes.
They are beautiful and they're prolific, and they allowed us to have flowers in every classroom until the end of the fall, for months and months and months. And they were beautiful. And it was really, that was something that our children from one classroom planted in a bed that wasn't too far from the building. It got good light. And then in the fall, they came back and they couldn't believe that these seeds that they had kind of thrown down in the spring were just so serving the community in such a significant way.
Right.
And so I will say, I think the flower idea, that's such a nice place to start. It's
a wonderful place to start.
right.
Yeah.
It's easy. It's generally successful. The children love cutting the flowers. It's, you don't have to say, let's leave that. It needs to grow farther.
Right.
Oftentimes in a garden, they're like, here's the cucumber and it's this big,
Yes.
right?
Exactly. Right.
So
Yeah.
and they really can have ownership. And the other thing we planted, which really came out of somebody throwing a pumpkin down in a place, was pumpkins came out in the fall, which was really fun for them to harvest. And that didn't take so much effort. If there was some watering that happened, but I don't think it was necessary, to be honest. But they felt ownership of it.
Sure. I think the ownership is really important. One year in our school in Colorado, in Carbondale, when we purchased the property, as many people go through, our playground was sort of a dirt pit, and we had to turn it into a playground. So we invited families to purchase plants for our gardens, and bushes and trees, and we had a long list of things that we wanted, and we had some work days, and one little girl planted with her dad what I call a snowball bush. It's got a name other than that, but it's got these big white snowball looking flowers, and she was probably 4 years old, and she came back until she was about 10 every year to check on her snowball bush. And it grew and grew and grew and got bigger, and and it was just, she had ownership over that part of the world, and that was pretty neat to see. It was really exciting to see.
And one of the things that I've been really struck by and I think it's worth talking about. Actually, it came out of one of the readings for ties, is that the average American child can name 10.
Oh yeah.
They can name 100 corporations, US corporations by logo, but cannot name 10 plants and trees by sight, right? Let alone birds.
Shocking. Yeah.
Right. I mean, natural, we're talking about not things that are in a zoo, right? And that the farm animal, we're talking.
Right.
And I have to tell you that when I read that, I realized, and I'm a Colorado person by origin. I backpack. I mean, I have names of some of the Colorado plants, but I had not worked on that myself. I hadn't worked on it with my children. I didn't even know all the names of the houseplants in my house.
Yeah.
And it really struck me that that is a place where we can step right in with children because if you name it, you're connected with it, right? And so you have the opportunity, instead of gathering flowers, would you like to cut some zinnias, right? You're naming and using. And since then, we've actually gotten inspired, and we are labeling around campus all the trees and the names of the bushes around our campus, so that our adults know the names, so that we can work with the children on that, because it's such a need for the community as a whole.
It is. And it brings up another thought that I had that I think is really, really important, and that is working locally. I think we would love for all of our children to know what the ocean looks like, and what a mountain looks like, and what a lake is. I mean, they probably know what a lake is, but many of them probably have not seen the ocean, or don't know what a desert looks like. And they can learn those words. We can show them pictures, we can show them cards, but what I'm really interested in is something completely different, and that's sort of a visceral connection with the natural world. So you need to work locally. So what you're doing with the trees in your playground or your environment is it's a beautiful idea. And they would have the names of different trees from maybe where I'm living, or Colorado. But they have that connection, and they can go out and touch that plant. And that's what I think we're really looking for. The other thing about gardening with young children, again being local, is there's a lot of good reasons for planting native plants that are native to your environment, primarily because pollinators are very specific about what they want, to what they can actually use to eat or to pollinate. They can't. There are all these different kinds of wild bees that most of us don't even know about. We know about honeybees and bumblebees and maybe a couple of others, but there are so many native bees that pollinate all kinds of things, which we desperately need, but they have to have plants that are native to the environment that they find themselves in. So I've been really developing in my own backyard a native garden with native plants. And there's a lot of reason to do that if you're trying to develop what I call a prepared habitat for creatures.
And I think every school, Montessori or not, has a responsibility to operate from that premise, because
I think so.
part of what I consider to be our ethical obligation, now that we're aware of the need for habitats. This weekend was Mother's Day, and for Mother's Day I went to the Wild Birds Unlimited and got a new bird feeder, and very excited about it. But she was saying that she put in native plants in her own backyard, and she used to see a few creatures here and there, and now she has 60 species of birds that are in her backyard because she's become this haven within
Right.
really about 6 months' time, a haven because creatures don't have the right plants, they don't have the things they need. And so for
Right.
us as a Montessori school, that's really important to us. And as we're stepping into this work, we actually just took out 2 big, beautiful, like we were in mourning, butterfly bushes because they weren't native. And therefore, we had beautiful butterflies on them, but they weren't serving that need for the population to have what it needs to be able to pollinate and really propagate the way they need to. And so that we're in that process as well as a school community of really digging into what's native. And as we plant and as we create new environments, very focused on making sure they are prepared for habitats. They're prepared environments for the creatures that need to live in them.
Right. Well, good for you. And it really is hard to take out the non-native species. Yeah, it's painful. Yeah. There's a man, his name is Doug Ptolemy, and he's got a really interesting idea. He wrote a book, and I heard him speak, and he thinks that our national parks, our beautiful national parks that are preserving the natural world in this part of in this continent, there just aren't enough of them. So he has started a movement trying to get individuals like you and me to develop native habitats in their backyard, and he's calling it the Backyard National Park. And he said there are so many backyards that we could have as much space as the natural native the national parks in our backyards, and help again do this great work of saving our planet.
Well, and what a beautiful idea. We should drop that into the show notes so people have
I
a
will. I have a list of books, and certainly his book is one of them. And
and
his
love that.
website, he's got a good website. In fact, the reason I thought of him is that they've written a children's version of his book about the backyard natural parks,
Love
native,
that.
yeah, national parks. So yeah, so we're all doing this together, really, which is very exciting.
Well,
Yeah.
and imagine if we started some Montessori schools took that on as well, and we became, what a cool movement to have
Oh,
Montessori
that is. What a
schools.
great idea.
And
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
map out where we are as we really take on committing. And it's not an overnight process, right? It just means
No.
as we grow and as we build and as things change, and that we really think about a space every year that we're taking on converting and making sure that it's serving all of the creatures, not just the children, because children, of course, always at the center, but
Right.
serving all those little creatures is actually what serves the child long term because it's what helps our planet. And so as long as we're clear about our priorities, I think,
Right.
right, we're okay. So I know people also want to hear more about gardens.
Okay.
So let
Well,
me
I've thought, knowing that people work in all different environments, I did think about how to try to rein myself in, because I like gardens and I have the space for a garden and live in a place where people garden. But I've also I've worked in the middle of Philadelphia, and had a very interesting experience in Tanzania and Taipei, which I will mention. But so I know there are all different kinds of environments that people are trying to do what we're describing. How do you actually create some kind of garden in your space? And in Philly, I was working in one Montessori school, and my husband was in another one. And I had a little space, so I was able to start a tiny little vegetable garden in Philadelphia, probably 3 by 6. And so we planted, and we let the children decide. Here are some things we could plant. What do you want to plant? And they chose tomatoes. So we had 2 or 3 tomato plants, and we chose tomatoes that were cherry tomatoes. And I think that's important. It doesn't seem that important, but there are certain vegetables that children dearly love, and they seem to like things that are their size. So rather than a huge fat beefsteak tomato, plant cherry tomatoes that that they can easily pick and pop in their mouths. So we had tomatoes. My husband's school was in Center City, Philadelphia, on Arch Street, right in the middle of the city. And their playground was on the roof of the building, which
Wow.
I'm sure occurs in lots of major cities.
That's right.
So he had um, 2 or 3 raised beds built for the roof, and the children began to garden in those raised beds. And I'm not sure what they planted, probably a number of different things, including flowers. I remember zinnias up there. Um, but the roof garden is still there. And then they had a worm composting box,
Mm.
which was in the basement of their building. And that's another, we haven't talked about composting, but vermiculture, worm composting is incredibly easy to do with young children in a classroom, and everybody should do it. Yeah, and I can put information about how you do that on a.
Can you give us a 60-second synopsis of what that would entail? Because
Sure,
that sounds
sure.
like that is something easy and
Easy. Yeah,
the children will be able to see it right away,
absolutely.
right?
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yep. So you can there's a kind of worm called a red wiggler,
Mm.
and it's not as big as an earthworm. The earthworms that we find outside, they're little tiny reddish worms, and they're also called compost worms, and they're surface feeders. So I have a worm box, which I had in my classroom. I have it now here, and it's just a big Tupperware container that I drilled holes in. Or I had a father. Who drilled the holes in the side of this Tupperware container, and I got a big tray to put on the bottom of it, because it gets a little drippy, not very, but a little bit. And you need to make some kind of what they call bedding for the worms, and you can use newspaper. That's primarily what I used. It's a little bit harder to get newspaper than it used to be,
Yeah.
because
Right.
everything's digital. But grocery bags, you ask parents to bring you flyers that they get, and as long as it's not shiny, you can rip it up, and children love to rip up the newspaper into little shreds, and soak it and put it in these containers, and then put your worms in.
Mm.
And then you feed them, and this becomes a science experiment. You feed them scraps from lunch, as long as they're not meat or cheese, something like that. You feed them. Worms like to eat almost all vegetable scraps, and they don't tend to like citrus, but it doesn't hurt them. And we would sometimes do experiments, like we'd put some apple cores in the worm box, and we'd put some orange peels on the other side to see which they ate first. And the children would keep a record of it. And so the worms eat the produce and turn it into soil. And that is their cosmic task. So it's a perfect Montessori
Mm.
lesson. Like, what is the reason to have a worm? They create dirt. They create soil for us. That's their job. Just like bees pollinate the flowers. So worms don't hurt you. They don't have teeth. You can hold a worm. Won't hurt you at all. Children are fascinated by them. So it's pretty easy to have a worm box. That's my probably more than 60-second
I love that. And that's,
explanation of how to do it.
in fact, we should put in the show notes, come to this point in the podcast to get the vermiculture,
Okay.
right? Because people, the truth is we all know Montessori guides are busy, right? It's
Very busy.
such
Yeah,
a big job. It's all consuming,
it
especially
is.
when you're getting started and
Right.
really doing it well. And we
Yeah.
want to make sure that we're giving as much as we can and also
Well,
honor that they may
yeah,
have.
let me jump in about that. I have some ideas. And when I was teaching, I didn't know anything about fish, and so I wanted an aquarium and put a note out on the parent newsletter. Will anyone help me? And of course, I got help and had a parent that sort of took on that and took care of my aquarium. And in my experience, if you reach out to your parent body, there's going to be somebody that knows how to garden
Mhm.
or who's interested in that. There might not be someone who knows how to do a worm box, vermiculture. So my other idea is to reach out to the Master Gardening Organization. And I know you're in Baltimore. I think you're in Baltimore. So
Yeah.
I looked up Master Gardeners in Baltimore, and sure enough, you have a group of Master Gardeners. Looks like a pretty well organized one. They're even offering some summer classes this summer. So Master Gardeners, the courses that we take are about 4 months long. You take 4 months of classes, and then at least in my community, we're required to do 40 hours of community service each year, or the first year, to become a real, certified master gardener. That's a lot of hours.
Mm.
So if a school in my community called me up and said I could use some help starting a raised bed, or with my house plants, or with a worm box, that I would jump on that opportunity to help, um, because I need to amass those 40 hours of community service. So every organization, every community has a master gardening program. It's a national program,
Mhm.
and they're all looking for ways to share their passion.
Mm.
So
Mhm.
that's what I would do. And I honestly didn't realize that until I became a master gardener myself. I didn't realize how much community service was involved. Um, and in Denver, in the Denver area, there's a master composting program, which is exactly the same. So
Wow.
we were required to work, and mostly what we did was we worked at farmers markets, giving
Mm.
people information about composting.
Mhm. I have
Yeah.
to tell you, that's a beautiful resource, and everyone in the United States that can
Mhm.
look and see who their master gardeners are in their area and
Right.
have a resource to support them in this effort. Because the truth is, we don't have to do it all by ourselves. We're better together. And people want to. When I walked into this bird store this weekend, it was so funny because turned out the woman who owns it had just been over at our school
Mhm.
doing a presentation for the children. One of the guides had asked her to come in, and she was so delighted. She had the picture of the children up on the wall in the store of
Yeah.
them saying, that like it was so touched her. So we have to remember that we get to be with children every day. And
Right.
these other folks, it's a gift. They think of it for years and years, and
That's really true. Yeah.
opportunity to contribute in a meaningful way to children's lives really makes a difference.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that when I was my mother was quite a gardener, and today you would call her a native plant gardener. But what she did was she dug up wildflowers in Colorado, which is, I'm sure, illegal. But she did it anyhow. And we traveled with a shovel and a bucket in the back of our car, and I can remember her screeching to a halt on top of a mountain path saying, "Oh my gosh, did you see the color of those sulfur flowers? We've got to have some of those." So we'd go dig them up. So today, the version of that would be a native plant person.
Mhm.
But she had such a passion for gardening that she would, you have to remember that people want to share their passion. And at the time, I remember thinking as a child, boy, that my mom, I mean, are we ever going to get there? Um, so I wasn't too thrilled about her love of wildflowers, but now I am. I mean, it sort of, I absorbed it. And I think that's what naturally happens with children. It's if you have a passion for something, it will come across. And you don't have to force them to work in the garden or pick up a worm or look at the caterpillars. It just happens because you're interested.
Mhm. Well,
So
and
we want to share our passions.
that's right. And even here's the thing, it may already be a passion for you, but if it is not, and if you're
Yeah,
listening to this podcast because you're trying to get started, you're in the
right.
exact right place. Because I have to tell you, 3 months ago, I thought, what we can go to the grocery store and buy groceries. It's nice to grow food, but it wasn't, top of my priority list. It wasn't until I realized how important it is for our children to be connected with the natural environment and
Absolutely.
their food and where food comes from,
Right.
and to have that experience that I all of a sudden became interested. And so you can take baby steps. It's, having
Absolutely.
having children, like that's what it's all about, is just getting yourself to take a baby step. So maybe it's planting beans and they get to watch them grow.
Yeah.
So,
You don't have to do very much. I mean, I think if you literally have no access to outside and you don't even have a roof where you can put a raised bed, have a flower pot.
mm,
You can plant something in a flower pot. You can actually plant things in water. Many things will grow in water, and stop and take a look at them. Um, that's the other thing that I tried to do when I was in my classrooms. I would wander around in the morning and I would look at the fish and I stop and look at a plant and say, "Oh, wow, does is that a new plant? Is that a new leaf that's just popping out?" And just modeling again, just being interested in what was happening
mm,
with the living things
mm,
in my environment.
mm.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. And I think that's exactly the modeling that our children, who for the most part are growing up in very busy homes and in busy lives, and there's not necessarily so much time. And I will share a quick story from our house. So, since I started doing this program in January, I've started, I've fallen in love with propagating plants and houseplants, right? And
Good.
I know all the names of them. I'm learning new ones. I went to North Carolina with my girlfriends and I bought 4 plants and I had to bring them back on the plane in a liquor box. Like I literally just, and so, but my daughter's watching this and now she is the person at school who's in charge of their seedlings. She's in the adolescent community. So the seedlings project, and my husband, who used to do a lot of planting, now is planting again. And we're all falling in love with it
Mhm,
simultaneously,
mhm.
and it comes out of that role modeling. And I didn't ask her to do any of that with me. It wasn't, but she saw where my attention was and my interest. And we have an opportunity to share with our children, even if we're brand new in the conversation and you bring in a new plant and you just take care of it and you
Right.
talk, right? And you talk about it and what's its name.
Yeah.
And next time we bring you on, Kathryn, we're going to talk about how you incorporate plants into your curriculum in the Children's House classroom.
Oh, good, because I have lots of ideas.
I know that's next time. That's next.
Okay.
But before we close, we have a few more minutes. Is there anything else you want to make sure that our listeners have as they kind of enter this conversation of how to bring, nature to the children or gardening to the children? Anything else you want to make sure you share?
Well, I would really encourage them to people to start small they're new to this, and just be aware. I mean, as a master gardener, I took the courses this January. I started in January and went through the winter, and it struck me over and over again as I listened to different speakers how often they said, it's all an experiment. We've killed this plant, we killed that plant, we tried this, it didn't work. I mean, you have to, it's going to be an experiment. That's one of the special things about gardening or being outside, developing a bird feeder and seeing which birds come. You never really know for sure. And so just approach it with a lot of curiosity and sort of willingness to be a little risky with things and try things out and start small. Start small. And if you kill a house plant, you kill the house plant. You put it in the compost. You feed it to your worms.
That's right.
That's the way you make that okay. That's the natural cycle of life. So.
And you really get to role model that for your students. Like
right.
we
Absolutely
overwatered this plant. It got too much water and it couldn't live with that much water.
Yeah.
So we failed. And that's okay.
I mean, I could talk forever, but that's another really important thing is if you're putting plants in your classroom and you've got young children, go to a plant store and say, I want some plants that really like a lot of water. Because children love to water. In fact, I had little signs that said, this plant has been watered, which I put in front of the class, a plant to attempt to keep them drier, but sometimes it worked.
And it's part of their taking care of the environment, and it's okay for them to learn that sometimes we mess up and that what did we learn from it? And so what are we going to try next time? And should we try again? Yeah, we should try again. We want to be able to grow things. I think that love for life, the love for
that's what
all
it is.
living things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And caring about the stink bug and caring about the pothos plant and caring about the caterpillar out on the garden and the little rabbit that's hopped by, and really letting ourselves love the creatures and the plant, all the creatures, including the
that's the goal. That's the goal right there.
Our world, right?
Yeah.
And what a gift to them. What a gift to them, rather than rushing through and really understanding that each living thing is such a gift to each one of us, and we can honor the life of it.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Well, Kathryn, it's been so much fun talking to you today. I'm already looking forward to our next conversation.
Yeah, I'm glad we're going to have another one. This was a lot of fun.
I think you have so much information to share with our world, and really thank you. Thank you for prioritizing this and fitting us into your life. I know there's a lot going on, and we really appreciate all your experience.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, thank you. And to our listeners, we just thank you all for spending time with us today. We know there's so many calls on your attention and things that you could be doing. We so appreciate that you have prioritized Greenspring Center podcast and the growth of your own classroom community. The children are the center of everything we do, and this is the Montessori revolution, and your work is important to this revolution. So thank you for everything you do. We'll see you next time.